Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Visionary Nurse Podcast. Stay tuned. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Visionary Nurse Podcast. For those who are just joining our journey, this podcast was designed to uplift, educate, and inspire you to dare to be influentially visionary. My name is Antonette Montalvo, your visionary nurse, and I am so excited to be bringing a fresh episode to you. We're already on episode 3. It's just been so exciting to be in this current series of the Power in Partnership. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different direction today. I know you're going to love it. But just to give a little background of me, for those who are meeting me, joining me for the first time, as I said, my name is Antonette Montalvo. I am owner of Antonette Montalvo Consulting and Coaching Services. And this podcast was really inspired by a lot of the work I've done as a community health consultant, as well as coach and mentor for nurses. I've always seen myself as an outside of the box visionary, and I like to find opportunities to just encourage nurses to think about how they can be innovative in their approach to the healthcare system, to nursing, and just to their own vision. And so a lot of the work was inspired by my work with the Montalvo International Community Health Initiative and just what I do all around as the visionary nurse. So in this episode, I have the pleasure of introducing a dear colleague and friend that I got a chance to meet in the Small Business Development Center. It was through our work together in the Small Business Development Board that we've gotten a chance to just really sit and think about our journeys in entrepreneurship. And so Andre Gregory, who is the current owner of Smoothie King in Greenwood, South Carolina, really takes a great opportunity to just take us through his journey from educator to entrepreneur. And then he also totally cheers on us nurses out there in terms of the ways that they can and we can be great assets to the world of small business and entrepreneurship. So I want you to stay tuned. It's going to be great. So hey everyone, it is Antonette, your host of the Visionary Nurse Podcast, and I have Andre Gregory here, current owner of Smoothie King Store 1799 in Greenwood, South Carolina. He's going to share his journey going from educator to entrepreneur and do a little bit of cheering for nurses and how nurses really can be a great asset to the world of small business and entrepreneurship. All of this series really about power and partnership is highlighting the ways that nurses can partner, whether in traditional or non-traditional settings. And this is going to be a great way to highlight some of that. And hey, free plugs for Smoothie King. It's the middle of the summer at the time of this recording, and so why don't you go and cool off? Smoothie King's totally not paying me for this, but I'm really excited to highlight this colleague of mine. So Andre, come on out. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being available for this interview. Thank you for sharing your experience. I really just want to highlight you. Hopefully this can get a couple of plugs for you as well. But maybe just tell a little bit about your background and how you got into the space of Smoothie King.
Wow. Okay. Well, like she said, my name is Andre Gregory. My wife and I, we moved to Greenwood about 7 years ago. Prior to that, I had always been in education. So like I was a K-12 teacher for 5 years. And then I moved into higher ed, just working in student services, international programs. And like, that was my bread and butter. Like, that's what I enjoyed. I felt like, all right, 20 years from now, I'll still be doing something in that space. Mm-hmm. And then, being in international education, one of the things that you work with is transitioning international students from whatever their home country is to study in the U.S. So I had a couple of coworkers, and we created this business where we created these, culture camps, acculturation camps, to get students familiar with what it was to study and to live in the U.S. We did that for, about a year. And then like our partner in China was like, hey, I'm going to go do something else. And at this time I was in Pittsburgh. We had a partner in North Carolina, and then we had our partner in China. And our partner in North Carolina, he was like, well, since this person's out, I think I'm going to be out. So then, I went through a period. It was like, okay, do we try to keep this afloat? Do we dissolve it? And we had just had Tessa, so my firstborn. So I was like, oh man, what do we do? What do we do? And then it just got to a point where it was like, hey, this wasn't, it wasn't viable anymore. So then we had to dissolve that company. However, during that period, I realized like I really like working for myself. So I'm just being honest. And I enjoy the challenges of entrepreneurship. Like I'm not the type of person that can do kind of the same thing day in or day out. I need like those different challenges, experiences. So when we moved to Greenwood, I remember telling my wife, I was like, Greenwood could really use a smoothie shop. Prior to this, like the only time we did smoothies was like at home, right. Mornings or, when you're trying to be healthy. And my wife was like, I don't know if Greenwood could support that. I was like, I'm telling you that Greenwood smoothie shop would do well here. So then, 2 years went by and I was saying the same things. And I remember I was in the parking lot of Planet Fitness and I called two of like my long-term friends. I was like, hey, I was just talking to them about, opening a smoothie shop. And they were like, Dre, you've been talking about this for forever. Like it's time for you to actually do something with it. And that day I went home and I talked with Andrea, my wife. And I was like, hey, I really think this is something that could be viable. And she was like, okay, if you're going to do this, I'll support you, but consider looking at the franchise model as opposed to a startup model. One of the reasons why she wanted to go that route, because the franchise model, you've got some, built-in supports. So, that was important, especially going into something like that we had never done before. So I did some research. I looked at the market, kind of like where the gaps are in the market, like what are the healthy food options that we currently have here? And they were limited. So then I said, okay, this is something that probably could work. And then next I started looking at specific franchises. I'm not going to tell you all the ones I looked at, but I looked at several. And, at the end of the day, there were some that they just kind of wanted you to sign on the dotted line, but it did not seem like they had the research behind their product. And then when we got to Smoothie King, like they were serious about the health benefits of the product. And they treated their franchise partners well. Like we reached out to a couple of existing owners and talked to them, and then we went and visited the corporate office. Long story short, we were like, all right, we're sold. And then, we started moving forward. And I think we signed in January of 2019. And then like we finally opened in September of 2020. So it was a journey.
Wow. I mean, just hearing all of that it's amazing to hear the track, because I definitely don't think things happen chance. I always think there's so much interconnectedness in all of it. And just hearing your own journey, even though we've gotten a chance to sit on this particular advisory board for about a year or so now, maybe a little bit longer than that, just hearing the crossovers of even my own journey of, I have an education background as well, but then switched to nursing, and always have been trying to blend health and education. I also have a global health background and lived abroad for a while. And, I have always ingrained the Spanish language into everything I do. My husband's from Puerto Rico. And so a lot of the outreach that we do is very much in the Spanish speaking population. So even just seeing your interest for incorporating the international piece into your journey is also just, it's, I always like to say there's no coincidences. It's just a matter of time until you all kind of overlap. And then even the fact that you lived in Pittsburgh and we lived in Philadelphia right before we relocated to the rural South. Get this, about 3.5 years ago. So probably about the same time. So I think a lot of us are often on these very same tracks and we just don't know it until we all intersect at different points. So,
very true.
But I love that journey, and I love seeing seeing that evolution. I think that's really important, especially when thinking about nurses, because I think, you said some really amazing points along the way, and I'm going to try to kind of pinpoint and pick at some of those just as we continue to go through the interview. Sure. But just thinking about, number one, you recognize for yourself that even though you had this kind of space and profession that you really focused on, which was the education space, K through 12, and even some of your initial business musings were in that kind of area, there was a deeper piece of your vision in the sense that you knew that you liked to be versatile and flexible about how you did things, right? And I think that's so good for nurses to hear specifically, because I think sometimes when you start off in any profession, you think, okay, this is all I should be doing. I can't have any other ideas or interests, especially when it's a profession that's very much a standard, right? Like teaching, nursing, education, those all kind of fall in those same standard profession aspects, but then also recognizing how you can branch that out and recognizing that versatility. And the same for nurses. I think it's really important for nurses to recognize that the skill set of us just being versatile. I mean, how many nurses have started off, in med surg, and then they went to the ER, and then they went to peds, and they went to the ICU. Recognizing that is a really important and critical skill set when you're thinking about business and entrepreneurship, knowing how to be in many different places and spaces and operate in that. But then I think also it shows, and it really shines through as you were telling your journey, that there were business rumblings happening for you either way. I'm sure that even when you were in the K through 12 and education space, you were probably someone who had a bunch of ideas to begin with. You just weren't sure where or when to implement them. And so again, thinking about my own journey in nursing school, I found myself launching a health education game with two other nursing colleagues in a competition that we were the only nursing group in this thing. And that's where I had my first experience with business and entrepreneurship. And it was from those moments that I was intrigued to say, you know what, this is definitely not going to be the last time. I don't know where it's going to go from here, but I definitely think it's going to continue to evolve into something else. So I just love highlighting all of those points, especially just the support of your wife in the process as well, and that she was open to kind of figuring out those models. I think for anyone who's going into the business and entrepreneurship space, have that point person. Like you definitely had your wife, you had your long-term friends, you had other kind of business associates, but then also recognizing where your limitations were, right? Because I'm sure there was a piece that you wanted to keep pushing through with, the previous model that you had, but just recognizing, you know what, this isn't viable anymore, even though I really want to continue. And it might have been like, your baby, so to speak. It was your first project out there. You still had to recognize when to let it go, but it didn't mean that all was lost. It just meant you had to shift your focus. So anyway,
it took me a while to, that idea of, all is lost.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it takes you a little while to kind of work through that. So,
definitely. No, that's so good to hear. And I think as we move forward a little bit, as we discuss, like, I would love for you to kind of talk through some of those challenges, especially in the early days to now. But for yourself, and when I know you were like, hey, let's do a franchise, and your wife's like, okay, we'll go in that direction. How did you, and especially like you said, the length of time, it was 2 years when you were talking about it before you actually went into action mode.
Right.
Well, what made you finally decide in the process, as you were like percolating the idea, to that threshold piece of now is really the time to take action? And then as you started to mention, what are some of those big challenges that came up along the way as you went from idea to action?
Well, I think that, anytime, entrepreneurship, life in general, there are always those mental hurdles that you got to jump over. So for me, for a while, I was like, hey, this would be viable. This would be good. And I don't know if it was, being, hesitant because like the first business failed. And then also looking at like lifestyle wise where we were. It's like, okay, going into this business is going to require a lot of time. At that time, my daughter was 5 and my son was 2. So, you've got young kids, and for the most part, like I was the stay-at-home dad at that point.
Right.
So it's like, okay, you've got that responsibility. Is it fair to pull time away from them in order to pursue this, even though like you're okay right now? So I think for me, like it was working through all that, like I said, and having those individuals in my life that can speak truth, can say, hey, like this is the route to go, or hey, this sounds good, but have you considered A, B, and C? So, because I've got one good friend, he's he's like the hype man. Like, he's like, yes, anytime you tell him an idea, like, he is that super supporting, rallying type person.
Right.
And then I've got another friend who's a little bit more grounded. So, and he's like, he wants you to think through some of the options, especially when it comes to personal life. And then, I've got my wife who's got me balancing, like, considering the personal, consider the business ramifications. So I think having those people to talk with and to talk through, all the things that were going through my head, I think that helped me move from just the talking phase to the action phase. Because they're like, hey, you keep talking about this, bring me back some information on it. So I think that helped. Also, I think looking at, a lot of times someone will have an idea for a business and the idea itself sounds really good, but based on where you are, the idea might not be good for that location. So you either got to change your business model, or you got to change kind of where you do business. So the other part that was good for me was actually doing like some market research and looking at, what currently exists, what demographics typically are going to be your consumers for the product that you want to give, or that you want to sell rather. So that helped. Additionally, looking at, like, first we went wide. Like, when we decided we were going to do the franchise model, we just started looking at several different franchises in general. Not just like, smoothies. We just looked at several in general. And then from there, we said, okay, what fits here? What doesn't fit? And then when we got that a little narrower, I started looking at, okay, what are the things that I enjoy? And to be honest, like, we had looked at, it was down to Smoothie King and Dunkin' Donuts. Like, that's the two. So if I like smoothies, I like donuts. So I was like, okay, we're going to look at these. But then, like, once we dug into it a little bit more, Smoothie King was the more viable option. I'm definitely glad we went that route.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it's just good to hear. It's good to hear that pathway. And I mean, it's also just funny to think you could have gone nutrition or you could have gone taste and delicious, but just the focus and the perspective.
Right.
But I think it's also good just seeing just your track, seeing your viewpoint and how you had to weigh out the pieces of it. Because I think a lot of times, I think even for myself, branching out into business, you have this idea, it sounds good, right? You have the general vision or hope of what you want to do. But like you said, not only recognizing the market of, what you want to give, but is it the right place to give what you want to give? Right. It's not only about having the awesome idea, but is the space that you want to deliver this awesome idea the right space? And obviously, with the trends of business and even healthcare right now, there's so many different ways you can spin that, especially as the digital market has increased, and you could pretty much go anywhere if you're looking for, something that may not be a brick and mortar. But when you're thinking about on the ground pieces of the situation, that's kind of that really key tip of understanding your market, right? And just researching that. And I think, again, for that open tip for nurses who are kind of navigating the space, if you've never been to business school before, and again, I'm by no means giving you any concrete business consult by any means, disclaimer, but just really thinking it through. I think that's really important, and something that I think anyone has to at least evaluate is, hey, all right, here's this idea. Is where I am where it needs to be, or do I need to rethink how to fit it according to where it is? Right. And I know that can be a little bit sometimes disheartening for people because, again, maybe you're not ready to up and move somewhere. Maybe you are, you just really want your idea to work and you want people to like what you have. So just finding ways to kind of tailor it or maybe modify it a little bit in some way, shape, or form so that it at least gets you started where you need to go, and then you go from there.
Hey, are you guys loving this episode? I'm just interrupting your listening pleasure just to jump in really quickly and let you know about some great things that are happening at the visionarynurse.com website. There is so much fun stuff going on. If you didn't already know, the Visionary Nurse gift sets are in full swing. Definitely stick around. Those who are on YouTube who get a little bit of viewing pleasure, you'll get a chance to watch a really fun packing video. But I have a major major announcement. Guess what? The Visionary Nurse, 90 Days of Inspirational Musings on Being Influentially Visionary ebook is now, drumroll please, an audiobook. Yes, it's an audiobook. You have got to take a listen. I have converted this ebook. Well, when I say I have used the great production skills of Heavenly Music Studios, owner Luis Montalvo, yes, my husband, great production skills in converting the ebook into an audiobook. So for those who are on the go, who don't get a chance to sit and read that much, you can listen and can be encouraged and can be inspired. There's great ways to check it out. So I highly, highly recommend that you get your copy. Right now, it's being exclusively sold as a part of another brand new offering, the Visionary Nurse Kit, a monthly subscription plan, 6-month subscription plan, by the way, where you can get access to that audiobook for up to a year. So head over to the visionarynurse.com website to find out information. I hope that you dare to be influentially visionary.
As you got the idea, you figured out the market, you nailed it on smoothies now. How did you make the money to do what you need to do, right? Where's the capital? What's the funds? It's not like you just say, okay, here's my blank check. Let's start a Smoothie King. Right. What were some ways or some even basic funding tips or things that you had to prepare to navigate even just launching your business?
Right. So, we were kind of like, hey, we've got this great idea, the money's just going to be there. So, on the front end, it was like, I don't even know if I really thought through like the financial aspect of it. It was more like, okay, let me just get through step one, then let me get through step two. And then, when I started working on the business plan, I remembered that when we lived in several different places, but when we lived in North Carolina, like the Small Business Administration, they were tied to the community college system. So I was like, hey, I wonder if South Carolina has something similar. So I started researching, and that's when I found BIN and the SBDC. And like that was, for us, that was a game changer. But let me back up just a little bit. If let's say someone wanted to do a franchise, for example, one of the things that the franchise is going to look at is like, what's your net worth and how much equity, you have in, home or anything like that, just your total net worth. So if anyone who is looking for financing, like the very first thing I would tell them to do is assess what your net worth is. So basically, what your assets versus your debts are. Right. Because that's like any bank is going to look at that, franchises are going to look at that just to see, hey, are you bringing in enough where they don't feel like you're, high risk? So like for us, that was step one. And to be honest, when we first applied for the Smoothie King franchise, like we were turned down because our net worth wasn't high enough. So, and I remember when they called me and let me know, and I was like, oh, come on. Yeah. Another hurdle or whatever. But, at that point, it was like, all right, let's pay off a couple of things, work a couple more hours here or there, and then a couple more months, we were good. But that helped me, one, to see that, the people the company that I was partnering with were serious about their standards. Right. And they weren't just going to, bend. So that was good. And then two, it just helped me to see, okay, you need to make sure that you have your ducks in a row. So once we got past that, and then I linked up with Ben in the SBDC, and Ben was like, he was a game changer. So, he really sat down with me and walked through, okay, these are the documents that any potential lending institution is going to need. So, your profit and loss and all those other documents. And he helped me to gather that information together. So it wasn't like I was on an island trying to pull things in and figure out. So, I would tell any of your thousands of listeners that they need to make sure that they link up with, SBDC here in South Carolina, or if you're someplace else, small business administration. They're usually tied to 2-year or 4-year institutions. So you want to link up with them and they will help walk you through the process. Then, the next step was once, you had your financial packet together with the completed business plan, because the business plan is basically the blueprint of, what your business is going to be, what you project. Your numbers are going to be over, the first 3 to 5 years. That's really, you're packaging up all the ideas. It forces you to do the homework. So like if you didn't do research on the front end, you were just like, hey, I've got this awesome idea. I know that it's going to be good. Creating the business plan helps you to walk through the steps. So that way, those blind spots that we all have when it comes to, quote unquote, our baby, it helps you to see some of those blind spots. But that's basically what the bank is going to look for. So our business plan got sent out to 5 institutions, and then 3 institutions were like, hey, we're interested. So then at that point, we met with them and, talked about what the rates were going to be, what they were going to offer, what services, supports they had, and then for us, we decided to work with the county bank, which is a local bank here. And then once that happened, it was, a fairly quick process. Of course, you got to turn over tax documentation and, sign your life away. A lot of different things. That's what it feels like. But at the end of the day, it worked out well when it came to, since, we're brick and mortar, so there was construction involved. There was really no money passing through us. We were just kind of the facilitator between the contractor and the bank, and they would submit their documents to the bank. The bank would come and look at the site just to make sure that, hey, they are where they're supposed to be. And, then they would pay out and, everything got paid. And we had a little bit of working capital left over. So when we first started, you had some money to do some things with. And yeah, it's been good.
Wow. It sounds like you had to apply for a home that you were going to build. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's what it felt like sometimes. So.
Wow. And that's such an interesting perspective, again, on the franchise side of things, is that it really did seem as if you are going in almost like you're creating another mortgage to be a part of, and you have to go through the lending and then they, check the site and et cetera, et cetera. But it's interesting, that perspective, because I know that there are many different ways that you can spin where business goes, right? And where entrepreneurship goes. And so the franchise model, it's just good to hear how that model fits for those who are looking to potentially go that way. Because like you said, on the flip side of it, even though it seems very much more of a formal process, there is a lot of evaluation of your personal assets, as well as your, your debt to income ratio and your net worth and et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of kind of walking through steps versus, on the flip side of like someone generally and genuinely just has an idea and they're like, I'm going to open my computer and do this thing. That it's just good to know the different components of that, right? Because the beauty with the franchise model, as you said, is that you have a lot of inner working support, right? You have the capital of, and you have the name behind, the other businesses that exist or are tied with Smoothie King. You have, a lot of it's kind of inherent and built into that, versus if you are just starting from scratch and you have nothing. It's not to say that, it's just super easy with the franchise, but when you literally have no name, have no brand, and you're just starting from the ground up, that's a whole other ball game, right? You might have a lot of leverage of which direction the brand goes, but you don't necessarily have all of the support until someone recognizes like, hey, oh, I see what you're trying to do. We'll like support this, or we'll put capital towards it, or we'll, XYZ thing. So it's just good to have that comparison between those two models, and just recognizing, transparency, some of the things that I went through to get my name out there to like maybe what you had to do. So I definitely didn't take out a second mortgage, but I definitely was in that space of, hey, I'm a nurse and I want to start this business. And people are like, wait, what? What are you doing? And so definitely even just building up the branding, understanding kind of the concept of visionary nurse, and understanding me as a nurse, and the space that I operate in as a consultant and coach, but recognizing that a lot of it really is just stemming from my experiences as a nurse and just thinking critically and strategically of how to implement programs in certain community settings. But on the other side of that is coaching other nurses to be able to think outside of the box, right? So I think, again, in kind of our similar situations, it really boils down to, we like to educate people, we like to teach people about new things, and some of that comes out in starting a franchise or starting a consulting and coaching business. And so it's just finding different ways, unique ways, innovative ways, for lack of a better word, to just even a spin on yourself. So I appreciate you being open about just sharing, some of the highs and lows of the process, and even that you kept going, right? Even though it's like, yes, I now have the idea, I now have the franchise model, my wife's on board, my friends are directing me, I'm in a good place, I got the net worth, but, I almost have what I need, but then there's still that hurdle of like, not quite where you need to be, you have to still be diligent. And so I think a lot of that, I think that's another like big tip, is just when you have that plan, stay focused, right? Because I think a lot of times you can get kind of discouraged along the way. And I won't even say kind of, you may get discouraged. And it takes resilience, right? It takes a level of resilience to say, I know this is a good idea. I don't know how this idea is going to go from like point A to point Z, but I'm willing to kind of plow through and see how it works out. So I think that's always just a big reminder for the nurses out there. And when you're thinking about your own leadership skill set, and even if you're, maybe you're still leading at the bedside, but it's just having resilience, whether you're promoting a new idea to your hospital administrator or you're going all the way into entrepreneurship and business. It's just learning how to be resilient, even in the transition and the understanding of how to implement an idea. And if it doesn't necessarily happen on day one, it doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. It's just figuring out how to work through those kinks. So anyway, and thinking about that, and really, because I'm going to nurse, that's what I'm going to talk about, right? So for you, and maybe from what you know about nurses and even just the space of nutrition and Smoothie King and where you're at right now, you're kind of 6 months in or so from when you officially launched, even though that's like 3 years and some time, right?
Yeah. COVID months.
Yeah. COVID months are different months. How do you feel like nurses could be great assets to businesses, maybe in the space of franchise, or even just specifically in your area or other areas that might be outside of the traditional model, in light of the pandemic, from what you know as maybe an outsider perspective of nurses?
Well, I think that, we're at a stage now where businesses want to present themselves. And for me personally, I'm going to talk more so about restaurant type businesses. They want to present themselves as being as, safe. And the trend is going toward a health trend from a dietary standpoint. So whether you're partnering with an individual restaurant franchise, or maybe even saying, hey, I have an idea that would work well for the corporate office for this franchise chain. One thing that you could do, look up where the corporate office is. Now, you can't just say, I'm going to walk in and have a meeting with someone, but, you can send a letter, you can send an email, you can make a phone call to start making that contact to go ahead and share that idea to get on someone's radar. If we're looking more nuts and bolts, local community, partnering with Chamber of Commerce. So putting on workshops and programs where businesses can come in to get some education on some of the things that they need to do to present themselves in a better light to guests. Like, that's something that would definitely be viable. If we're getting a more micro level, when you just look at the skill set of a nurse, flexible, dependable, great under pressure, problem solvers, proactive, and can also take direction. Like, sometimes that's missed on people, but that is something that managers, business owners, like, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for someone that has that blend, that ability to both be proactive, but to also be able to take direction. So, I think that those skill set, those descriptors adequately and appropriately describe, nurses.
Thank you. If I use sound bites, I'd put a whole cheering section in there to say, yeah, you know what? We are pretty awesome. That's good. And if nurses needed a hype man just now, that was your hype man right there. that was your hype man moment. So that was great. And for, if as a collective nurse profession, I can't say I can speak for all the nurses in the world, but I appreciate you laying it out that way. And I think that's just such an encouragement for many nurses, especially too. There are many of you who, unfortunately, just again, with the the trend of the pandemic have felt very much burnt out at, maybe their traditional clinic or at the bedside. And there's just a lot of ways that nurses are reevaluating. And so in a way to see that there is still much value and efficacy to just your profession, who you are, what you've studied for, it might be worth, switching it up a little bit, looking at alternative opportunities, even if you end up going back to the bedside again or traditional clinical care, just recognizing that there are other areas that nurses are really important, and they need to be heard. They need that voice to be shared so that for those folks who aren't necessarily in the space of healthcare can lean on that. And that's where, my favorite word, cross-sectoral collaboration come into play. So it's just really exciting to think about. Yes, it's a long word. It's a long buzzword to be able to call it your buzzword, but it's a good one. It's a good one, but you will hear me say it again. But just that cross-sectoral collaboration is the wave of the future in my mind, and just thinking about that it's being able to lean on both of those places. So as we try to wrap up our interview a little bit, I'd love to hear, for your own self, if you had a nurse at Smoothie King, what would that nurse be able to do for you? And then maybe any resources or tips, certifications, last minute things. And you talked a lot about the SBDC, which again, I give a resounding yes and vote of confidence. As a big plug for our mutual small business advisor, Bill Calhoun. He has been so instrumental, sounds like for the both of us, just in being able to really sit down, help us understand what are the challenges, but also the wins, and just, someone who's able to give you that extra perspective, insight, and just to encourage you. I know for myself, there have been many times where I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. I remember the first day I walked into his office, but I said, I have this idea, is there any way that we can pull this off? And he sat down with me and really helped me work through all of that understanding. So you definitely find that person in the SBA or SBDC as a starting point. But yeah, I don't know for yourself, if you have nurses, what they can do for you, and then resource tips. And then after that, promote away anything else you want to promote.
I mean, if I had nurses, I probably wouldn't have to be in the store. Just run the store. And I'm being honest. When you're looking at restaurants, you're looking more so. And someone came in, they had a nursing degree. We would be looking for them in a management role, so leading people. So unless they just came and said, "Hey, look, I just want something to take my mind off of nursing. I just want to make these smoothies," and that's it. So that's what I would be looking at, especially, we're 6 months in, but probably in the next 6 months, we'll be thinking about, okay, well, what are the next steps? Are we going to open a second store? Are we going to keep this one and, open a different franchise to diversify some? So, you need people that, like I said, are flexible, and can kind of, bend but not break. And that's definitely a nurse. I think for us, when it comes to promotion, just come by the store. I mean, that's all I really need to say. We're in the Publix Pavilion, right next to Red Bull in Greenwood. We're open all the time. So I mean, right now, like we are, I'm just thankful we are doing well. I cannot complain. So we are truly blessed in that aspect. That's all I got.
That's awesome. Well, if anything, I appreciate you sharing some of your journey, your insight, giving a strong thumbs up for nurses and everything else in between. So, hey, nurses, if you've been thinking about how can I incorporate my understanding of nutrition into a business model where I need some type of support, but I could still have some flexibility, who knows? Smoothie King may be your next place. And no, Andre is not paying me to say that. I'm promoting this on my own. So again, a disclaimer, no one's forcing me to say it. I really just wholeheartedly believe there's lots of different ways that nurses can insert themselves. And I think it's good to think outside of the box. So if anything, thank you. Check out Smoothie King if you're in the Greenwood area to go get a Smoothie King. I have personally been there myself and it is great. And it's just good. It's good to have that opportunity and option, especially, unfortunately, sometimes in rural areas and in rural South areas, you don't have as much as the nutrition base as you might have in bigger cities. And so it's just good to know that those options exist, and that it's branching out and creating a market that really needs to be met. Thank you so much for hanging out on the Visionary Nurse podcast. Again, I'm your host, Antonette Montalvo, owner of Antonette Montalvo Consulting and Coaching Services. If you are a nurse that's looking to do things a little bit different, if you want to talk through some idea, vision, some way to take something that's been rolling around in your head and turn it into action, definitely reach out to me. Check out www.visionarynurse.com and we can connect and we can talk through ways that you might be able to be innovative in your own right. And as I always like to say, that you can dare to be influentially visionary in the way that you do things. And for all those other organizations and maybe non-nursing folks that happen to listen to this podcast, again, think about having a nurse on your team, whether it's just figuring out how to navigate the realm of the pandemic, thinking about how to incorporate new ideas that are very health focused into the way that wellness happens on your team or nutrition happens on your team, or even if you're just looking at how to strategize in a way that's going to be healthy overall as you move forward. Definitely consider a nurse. Nurses are great for these types of things. And as a nurse who likes to work as a community health consultant, believe me, your community and your fellow nurse colleagues, and again, that cross-sectoral collaboration will thank you as you start to embrace that buzzword. So it's been great talking to Andre Gregory, owner of a franchise of Smoothie King in Greenwood. We look forward to seeing how things continue to blossom. Check him out and thank his wife for pushing him and being alongside him as well, and all the great people that provided that insight. So stay tuned for the future episodes of the Visionary Nurse podcast and our series of business and entrepreneurship. And again, like I always like to say, may you dare to be influentially visionary. Take care, all.